Welcome to the Global discussion with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, a real pleasure and a treat to be joined by Andie Cooper. Andie, you're very welcome to the show. Before we get into all the great topics you and I are going to discuss today, tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us a little about what you're doing at the moment, just to set the context for us. Over to you, Andie. You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, Simon. I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. So, just as a bit of background, I can keep this short and sweet. All I've ever really done in my professional career is public relations. So, I'm currently an account director at Beachhut PR, which is an international PR agency, and we focus primarily on tech clientele. So, startups all the way up to multinationals, and tech is really our bread and butter. It's a pleasure because I'm not a technically minded person whatsoever, but I get to see all these amazing, innovative things that are going on in the world and their value. So it's a fantastic job, and it's, to be honest, the only thing I've ever really wanted to do. For context as to why I got into PR in the first place, I grew up with a lot of journalists. So a lot of my first memories would have been in the newsroom watching like Thomas the Tank Engine at like age 5, probably like driving every single journalist ballistic. So I've always had like a really deep appreciation for the media, but I figured out quite early on in my life that I probably was never going to be a journalist. And then I got introduced to the world of PR, and I was like, this is perfect. This really ties in with my passion, and I can be creative with this, but also very strategic. So it was kind of the ideal career path for me, and that's led me to where I am today. In terms of education, I did an undergrad in Trinity College Dublin in business and language, so I can speak a little bit of Polish very, very badly. And I've also done my master's degree in marketing and digital communications, which I did on the side in the last 2 years. So that's short and sweet, all about me.
So thank you, Andie, for sharing that little bit of context. It's very helpful to know from you took us on a trip of Thomas the Tank Engine and journalism into the wonderful world of PR. And I know Beachhut PR are really making some waves in this space. So thanks for giving us that context. Let's get into our discussion a little bit because I've got some things I wanted to ask you. Now, I know you have a heavy focus on lots of companies, but tech in particular. They get a lot of global attention, maybe from your base in Ireland, for example. Um, are there some key ingredients for telling a story in a way, though, that cuts through internationally? Because you're going across borders and languages and cultures, aren't you?
100%. I mean, I think that's really crucial is understanding the different nuances of the different geographies that you're targeting. So we are very conscious of that here at Beach of Pure, and we actually have a base in Dublin, but we also have offices in London, Amsterdam, and Belfast as well, because we felt when we were expanding the team and expanding internationally, it was really important for us to have boots on the ground to really understand the ecosystem, understand the media markets that we're working with. So that's a kind of a bit of our specialties is there. One thing I would always say for tech founders or startups or even at multinationals, but more for the kind of startup space, I would always say it starts with the basics. If you're looking to get a bit of nice media coverage, I would always go with your domestic market first. They're going to want to see you win. It's great to kind of do a little bit of testing of your messaging. Particularly in Ireland, I have found like the Irish media is super lovely and they're super friendly and they really want to see Irish businesses win. Ireland also has comes from a huge vantage point because we're English speaking. So if you're trying to attract a few customers in the US and they give you a Google and they see an article pop up from like the likes of the Business Post or the Irish Times, that's accessible and it's readable. And it's the same sort of principle in the UK as well. It gets a little bit more complicated when you're going into kind of mainland Europe, etc. But like the main same message stands. It's great to get in with the foundations and do a little bit of local PR first. But and also it's great to, build your credibility early on. So like point to your customer milestones. If you have investment or backing, definitely point to that. So like really nice tangible things. One thing I will say when you're trying to expand into different markets, it's very rare you'll find a journalist who actually cares about the tech. So unless you're talking to a tech trade or like a tech specific journalist, they don't want to see how the sausage is made. The biggest piece of advice I can give to any sort of tech company is you have to show the value of what you're doing. What is the problem that you're solving? What is the mission you're on? What is wrong with the space at the moment that you are doing differently? That's where real value is. particularly if you're trying to get into the mainstream, it's very, very seldom that, some random 30-year-old has a clue what, like, your AI model does at the end of the day, but they want to know how it makes their life better, how it makes their business better, and how it makes the world around them better. So that's something that I would like, it goes across every single market. You have to go in with that sort of value-driven story. And then also I would always say, figure out what the landscape is in the different countries that you're trying to speak to. So, like, what works in Germany doesn't work in Spain. So, you have to really do that kind of market research. And, like, as I said, that's why we have different offices scattered around Europe, because we really want to get on the ground and understand those nuances as well.
You dropped some real great insights there, Andie, to my first question. I love what you were saying at the start about the PR approach, that
Mm,
get it right in your local market because they want to cheer you on and using your local media, and then that gets picked up internationally. That's very smart. Um, and the other thing in terms of understanding sort of boots on the ground, if I can use that
mm,
term, strategy, understanding the local nuances, I think is so important. But the thing that you said secondly, actually, also stuck with me, that they don't really want to get into the technology to the nth degree. And I think a lot of companies and a lot of maybe founders or tech experts can get carried away on that, when actually it's exactly what you said. What's the value proposition? How does this make my life easier and better? And what's wrong with the sector at the moment? That's actually a better story, isn't it? So thanks for
mm.
sharing that. Now, I know through your role and your company, you've worked, because I've been keeping tracks on it too, and you've been working across sort of the news story that was Web3. Obviously, AI is hot at the moment, and all those sort of deep technologies. But what about the more granular approach to the actual PR on top of what we've been discussing so far? Because the tech is highly complex and it is still evolving. So, do you try to steer away from getting into the tech talk completely, like at a deep level? And how do you do that when the PR story, maybe if I could offer today, is going to be different in 3 months' time because it's moving so quick, or at least it appears to be?
100%. It's a really interesting point. I mean, it makes it so exciting to be involved in this sector, especially with emerging technologies. So, like the likes of like quantum computing, Web3, all the sort of blockchain initiatives that are being pushed out at the moment. Like we're seeing huge momentum behind that, to be perfectly honest. But exactly to your point, I'm not a tech expert by any means. I didn't even do science in like secondary school. I don't. If you gave me a math problem, I would struggle to solve it. But what I can do is make what they're doing accessible. So I think what's really important to me is a partnership-led approach with my clients. So what my area of expertise is the media and where I can position them so they can get their story out. But what they're experts in is their sector. So it would be they can do the deep tech stuff. I just have to put them there and I have to ensure that the messaging and the language is all in place so that it is accessible. So particularly when you're working with tech founders, they tend to be like the smartest people in every room. And that can be when they're speaking with journalists, you have to remind them, like if there was a 90-year-old woman reading this piece or listening to this podcast, what would she take away from this? There's something that I always say in media training. It's if you were explaining this to an 8-year-old and the 8-year-old isn't getting it, we need to peel back the language a little bit more. So I think it is that partnership of knowing that they are the experts and it's up to them almost to educate the market if they want to be engaging in that sort of approach. My area of expertise is just getting them there in a way that is advantageous for their business needs and like pushes the sector forward. So my main thing is that you have to translate complexity into clear, concise language. And that's the focal point of all my strategies. And then it's up to the clients to do the rest. And like, look, exactly to your point, everything is changing at such a quick pace. It is to your advantage to talk about the development and the growth of the sector. So you have to lead with a vision. I do also always say to my clients when I'm doing media training, be a salesperson when called for and a thought leader when needed. because that is more advantageous to you and in how you are perceived by the media. You can only talk about yourself for so long anyway. Journalists want to hear about how the sector is developing. So we want to position our clients at the forefront of that development and not at the ones dragging their heels behind.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I loved what you said about translating the complexity. That's a real good takeaway. You're talking as well about, fast moving technology. We
Mm,
talked a little bit about across different countries and languages and people and communities, but the global media landscape in which you operate, to me, it appears extremely fragmented. There's lots of different channels. It's very noisy. There's always something new bombarding us every second of the day. What have you learned, or what could you share with us here today about building those relationships with journalists and editors and media outlets? Because you touched on it a little bit at the start. You were saying, I find the Irish media journalists, for example, good to deal with. They want to cheer you on. But when you take that across maybe other territories, is there any sort of secret sauce or magic that you could share with us in terms of building those key relationships, Andie?
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just to go back on your previous question, it probably goes without saying as well, we're very diligent in reading the news. We're doing a disservice to ourselves and to our clients if we're not keeping up with the trends and know exactly what different journalists are talking about, what beat they're following. So it's a lot of reading the news, both online and the old-fashioned way, whacking the paper open on a Sunday morning. So I think that's really crucial as well. In terms of you're completely right in what you said. Attention economy is scarce, and it's a problem that all marketers are facing at the moment. And like, sure, you feel it yourself when you go on your phone and you're like, oh my God, this is so much information. It's hard to take stock of what's important and what's not. But it's also important to note that the ratio of journalists to PR people, it's skewed. So there's more PR people than there are journalists. So if you want to get your story in and you want to make those relationships work, there are a few key ways to do it. The number one thing I'd say is you have to remember that journalists are people. Like they're people with families, they're people with other commitments, they're people who have a million and one other stories to write, to edit, etc. So you're not calling them for a favor, you're calling them in because you have that relationship with them, you have the trust, they're the person for that story. And that's really foundational to the relationship. You have to understand that it's reciprocal, it's respectful, and ultimately, that what that kind of boils down to is the importance of being helpful. So, what I always say to my clients, and it's something that I take on myself, is it's a very idealistic thing to think to yourself, like, oh, these journalists are only writing for their readers. That's not true. They're also writing for their editors. Like, everyone has a job. At the end of the day, media is a business as well. But you have to be pitching stories to them that you think are valuable for them. They have to be on the beat of what this journalist is interested in. I would also always say have a bank of stuff that you can give the journalist. Never make the journalist go looking for stuff. So if there's stats, if there's case studies, relevant collateral, have that to hand for a journalist. You never want a journalist to have to follow up and be like, "Oh, so do you have a headshot of the person that you've just pitched to me?" You just have to work with them and be cooperative. I would also say, particularly as you said yourself, the global media landscape is so fragmented. So if you're doing a mail merge to like journalists in France, journalists in Germany, journalists in like Singapore, and it's all the same thing in standardized English, not taking account like the tonality that you would use with different journalists, and also talking about this global issue that maybe isn't a global issue. It might not be an issue for the journalist in Australia. Like the one size fits all approach does not cut it anymore, particularly in the current media landscape.
Yeah, I like the tailored approach to that. It's very good. And I also, you made me think when you said, the journalists, they're not just writing for the story or the consumer, but they're also writing for their editors. And of course, taking that pain away from them and providing everything that they need, exceptionally insightful. And of course, a big story in your local home market or country may not be the same, may not have the same volume, or may not even be on the radar in some other jurisdictions. So that's really useful to hear about. And I wanted to ask you something kind of related to this, because I know that you've spoken a lot about the importance of maybe the founder or the executive of a company being able to tell that story. But some of these people, they want the publicity, they want the coverage, they want their story to reach and connect. But maybe personally, they're not exactly comfortable with that space. Any sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it's more common than you would think, particularly in the tech space. Like these are people who are very engineering focused and like very product focused. And obviously then once they understand that, all these other things go into building a business, they're really keen to get involved in it, but it just sometimes just isn't in their wheelhouse, isn't in their area of comfort. So what we really do try to be is a guiding hand for any sort of spokesperson that's coming on, be that the founder, be it the CEO, COO, anyone that we think should be positioned in front of media. The last thing we want to do is do it in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable. It feels unnatural for everyone the first few times that you do it. But the main thing is practicing, to be honest, and the preparation beforehand. So if I had to give a few tips, the first one would be to be yourself. Authenticity sells. Like particularly in a world where we're being bombarded with fake news, fake opinions, brands with like an overly clean image. If you go into an interview and you're yourself and you're talking about this project that you've put so much time into with clear passion, that's going to make you a more memorable interviewee. That's going to cut through more than you going in and like thinking yourself, oh, I have to hit like key message X, Y, Z. If you're going in there being yourself and saying, this is my story, this is the value I'm bringing, that's going to resonate more with the readers than you going in there and sounding overly rehearsed. And that brings me to my second point, which is you have to focus on the why. You have to focus on the why you're here, what value you're bringing. And I know I keep on repeating that phrase, but that's so crucial. And you also have to take the opportunity for what it is. It's an opportunity to tell your story. So if you are in there and you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, feel free to like inflect a bit of color and a bit of character and a bit of personality into that interview. I've touched on it already, like journalists are people. You can speak to the journalist like they're a person. You don't have to talk to them as if you've had three glasses of red wine on a night out and you're suddenly spelling them up, telling them all your secrets. But they are still people. You can have a conversation with them and they're going to respond. And like it's that sort of dialogue that builds meaningful relationships and will make the journalist want to come back to you in future. I would also say it's really important to practice in safe spaces. So if you are a CTO who's more technically minded, start off with a tech focused podcast because then you'll go, okay, I can do this. This isn't that bad. Or you can do written interviews, which are increasingly popular, written op-eds. There's other ways to get your key messages out there in a way that suits you. We're never going to force you into anything that you don't feel comfortable. Back to that, like practice, prepare, and then the last P is perform. Practicing really just starts off by doing like a few mock interviews. Something that I think is really useful to do is if you are brushing your teeth at night and you've got 3 minutes, think to yourself, if a journalist asked me this about my company, like what does your company do? What would I say in that 3 minute space? Versus if you're washing your hands and you've got 30 seconds, think to yourself, okay, now I'm on live radio. What would I say in 30 seconds about my brand? How am I going to distill this down into something that's suitable for this media form? Another thing that I always ask is, and it's kind of similar to what you would do almost if you were doing like a college essay, where you'd give it to someone who's in a completely different course and you'd be like, do you understand this? And it comes back to what I said already about you have to make sure your messaging is understandable for the 8-year-old child and for the 90-year-old grandmother. So I would always say, get like a friend or a partner who knows nothing about your business, get them to ask you questions. And if they go, oh, that doesn't make any sense, then you have to like peel it back or revise it a bit. So that's the practicing bit. The prepare, I would always say, read up on the journalist, know what they're comfortable speaking about, know what their knowledge level on the topic you're going to be discussing is. So, like, if it's a general business journalist, do not go in there guns a-blazing with all this like jargon around blockchain technology. They won't understand it. It's going to be a painful experience for both of you. But if it's a journalist that like specializes in like crypto, go in there, say whatever you want because they're going to understand it. So preparing is really, really crucial. And then the last P is perform. But that comes again, if you've got the practice and the preparation down, the performance, it gets remarkably easier.
I have a few follow-on questions because you've made me think there, Andy, and I loved your answer. But the three Ps, great, great approach to it. But the thing that I just wanted to tease out with you, with all this new technology that we have, and artificial intelligence, and all
Mm.
the fragmented media we've talked about, and all the different journalists and media outlets that you have to connect with, it seems interesting to me that it all still seems to with despite all that, it all still seems to come back to just be a human and be passionate and be genuine. Am I right in saying that?
100%. I mean, like, you have to think about the amount of probably ChatGPT press releases that these journalists are getting a day, and they're like, "Oh my God, I can't handle another AI generated quote." So if you sit down with a journalist, you have to remind them that there's actual people behind these businesses. People don't buy from, there's a quote, and I'm going to absolutely butcher it, but it's like people don't invest in ideas, people invest in people. So I think it has to, you really have to go back to first principles of like, you are the person who founded this company. It's your idea. Lean into that experience, lean into your own personal story instead of more of the same, because the exact same point that you've made about the fact that there's just so much being thrown at us, it's so much of the same thing in a world where like everyone is doing the exact same thing. What makes you individual is you, and I think that really cuts through with media.
Yeah, thanks. And the other thing I wanted to tease out based on your last discussion point there was this ongoing debate between long form and short form media, whether that's printed articles, digital articles, video, podcasts, whatever. Because you were kind of saying as well, what would you say to a journalist if you had 30 seconds or a minute or whatever? Um, have you got any views or observations from your world in terms of that sort of debate between long, medium, and short form communications?
I think it's what suits the spokesperson best. So I have clients who like love a podcast because they get to get into like the really nitty gritty of their business, and it's where they perform better. Whereas I know that there's some clients that I have that the adrenaline of live radio really lets them shine. And it's that thing like diamonds are made under pressure. So diamonds are made when you've got 3 minutes and you're on a national radio station. So it's a bit of that. I think PR works best when all of those different channels are used together. So I always say to my clients as well, PR is done right when you are repeating yourself constantly, because the same people who have listened to a podcast with you talk probably haven't listened to you on the radio or probably haven't read the op-ed that you've got published. So you need to be utilizing all these different touch points, because at the end of the day, PR is just a clog in like a much bigger wheel. Bad analogy, but you know what I mean. And you have to be ensure that your audience is seeing you in these different levels, because you never know, your next big investor might be the person who listens to you on local radio. You just have to give into all of them. That being said, some types, some media platforms, they just suit the style of the spokesperson better, and we'll always keep that in mind as well. But I love all, they're all my babies. I love all different types of media platforms.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And it reminds me of the parallel with sort of the pure advertising world, because just because you've seen an ad or you're tired of hearing an
Mm.
ad doesn't mean everybody else has. And they maybe there's different media for different people and different approaches. And it's I was reminded of a chief executive who got tired of seeing his billboard ad next to his house. And it was only months and months later, after he complained that it hadn't changed, they said, well, firstly, just because you've seen it outside your house, not everybody lives in your house. Secondly, you probably know they put it there just to make sure you would see it as the CEO paying for the advertising
100%.
campaign.
100%.
Yeah,
I've had clients in the past give out to me, they're like, I can't see my headshot one more time. And I'm like, no, that's the point. You have to see your, like, I'm sending you the clippings being like, this is you. That doesn't mean I'm sending everyone the clippings being like, look at this spokesperson speaking on that. So yeah, it's a complete parallel between advertising and PR in that way.
very good. Let's pull out a little bit. Let's zoom out a little bit, and let's talk about the role of PR, because whether it's been through COVID, whether it's been through booms and busts, whether it's been through the political and global news story cycles that seem to just be coming every day now.
Mm.
You must have seen, Andie, the shift in the PR approach, the different approaches that you need to take now. And we've got this sort of rise, haven't we, of the brand owned content, and we've got social
Mm.
media in that mix too. And of course, as I mentioned, the change in news cycles. So how has the role of PR shifted? Has it shifted? Is it fundamentally different today than it was only a few short years ago?
I think the fundamentals have stayed the same, but the landscape has 100% shifted. Completely agree with all of the points that you've made. We have so many different channels that have just shot up. So, like, I joined the PR world during COVID, and during COVID, TikTok had just shot up, but it still hadn't caught on the way it has right now. And it's such an interesting one because previously clients would have said, "Can I get this news out?" And it probably wasn't suitable for media and it wouldn't really go anywhere. But now with own channels, they can put it up as a blog on LinkedIn, or they can utilize it as talking points in like a short video for the likes of TikTok, for the likes of Instagram. So it does give a lot of variety. The most important point that this has all proven to me, this changing landscape, is that PR just can't operate in a silo, which I think it's really easy for agencies to kind of slip into that mindset of thinking like PR is be all and end all. But in reality, it has to work in tandem with these owned channels, with advertising, with wider brand positioning. I think it's really important that marketing is viewed holistically, and pure is just a part of that. And if you get it into your head that it is a very individual activity, that's where the brands aren't going to see results. So it doesn't matter how many great pieces you get in tier one publications if it's not being fed back into like their own channels, and if it's not reflecting the messaging that they're pushing out on their blogs, it's a little bit futile. So there has to be a lot of understanding of that. And like that's just the way the landscape works at the moment. And businesses that are smart are utilizing all of those channels. What we already touched on, which is how many times are you seeing a brand, but you want to ensure that you're seeing a cohesive brand at the same time. Another big shift is that speed matters. The news cycle is so quick. Reactive pitching is just as important as proactive pitching. So if you're a client who, say you're a consultancy and you advise a lot of companies on their positioning and their market expansion and everything that's going on in the geopolitical landscape with the tariffs, etc., if you are waiting for a journalist to come to you and be like, can you give me a comment or like a bit of an insight to this? You're playing a losing game. You're much better off being able to whack out commentary, highlight your value, highlight your thought leadership. But the only way to do that is speed. If you are taking 4 hours to sign off on a comment or to draft a comment, the journalist has written the piece already. So it's really important to be reactive and cooperative in that regard. But like speed is the biggest thing that I've definitely noticed shift over the course of my time in PR.
Yeah, no, excellent points. The two that really hit me was, PR doesn't operate in a silo, and of course, speed, as you're just mentioning there, um, because it seems to be a critical factor now in getting the
Mm,
story out, getting mentioned, and also going back to something you were talking about only a moment ago was there is still that importance of the fundamentals, the things that hold true in PR, and also the impact of repetition and the same story and the same messaging being consistent, I think was the word that you used. That's so important. I want to bring it back as well to the sort of international aspect of PR then. So, you worked across whether it's the US and Europe, we were talking about earlier, and we touched on sort of, having to adjust things for, I think
mm.
you had mentioned that Germany and Spain, for example. But is there any sort of other advice that you'd have in terms of being able to address those cultural nuances or shape the way that you craft and pitch those stories to different regions? Anything else you could share with us there, Andie?
I think there's two main things to keep in mind. And number one is that local proof points matter. So if you are pitching a US journalist about something that's going on in the UK, to what end? The US journalist is writing for their US focused readers, and you have to keep that in mind. So I would always say Same way I'm saying, the way you speak to journalists, you have to tailor that because the one size fits all approach doesn't work. It's the same. You have to tailor stories per region. It's just so crucial. It's the only way to cut through is you have to be speaking to them directly. So I think that's really important. But also relationships between different journalists in different areas are different. So sorry, I said the word different there a load of times. But for example, I know I actually already mentioned German, but German journalists, you would refer to them by their second name. So you'd say Mr. or Mrs. And it's much more formal, the approach that you would take with them versus even just the Dutch. They're a little bit more relaxed about it. And, you can, German media, I would never ever pitch them in English. We have a German speaker on the team. She will always do the outreach in German. They will not read it if it's in English. Dutch, you can send it to them in English and they won't mind. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, like the different nuances with language. If you have to keep in mind the local tongue. So we've done a really good job in hiring people who live abroad, who speak different languages, so we can really tap into that local knowledge instead of just expecting all the journalists to work in the same way that we do. And we'll always give that advice to clients as well. You have to have understanding of the fact the cultural differences more so than anything else.
Thanks for expanding on that, Andy. All really good points. Look, to finish off, I've got maybe a slightly related question, but an important question. And I often see that, particularly in technology, because we've been focused a lot on technology companies here today, but they sort of can be quite historically male-led as opposed to female-led or woman-led. And I want to touch on that a little bit. And also from an investment perspective, I often see the minuscule amount of global funding that goes to female founders or technology companies compared to male-led organizations. And it's a huge disparity, and lots of people have commented on it. But my point is really back to PR on that context. Are there ways? I know you work with women founders. I know you're passionate in this space, which is why I wanted to end with this question. Are there ways that thoughtful, well executed communications can help that maybe underrepresented voice create more visibility, start to level the playing field a bit in the crowded tech space, Andy?
A wonderful woman said to me recently, if you can see it, you can be it. And that's something that has really, when she said it like that, it was something I had always felt, but she just articulated it so beautifully. So even going back to myself and my own career path, I probably would have never looked at PR had I not seen the wonderful representation of Samantha Jones on Sex and the City. And I know that's such a trivial way, like, example, but you have to see these things in order to go, actually, that's something I could do. And I think tech has definitely been dominated by men, and we're even seeing the tech bros culture that's risen up in recent months. And the front line at the inauguration ceremony, like the tech bro, they haven't done much to dispel that sort of stereotype. But I think there is a huge growing ecosystem and community of female founders across the world. And why I say community is I've seen these communities, support each other and like really try and rise up. And they're absolutely, like, I've spoken to so many women founders over the last 4 years who have just been absolutely incredible. And they have these really phenomenal businesses that you probably have never heard of because they are not pushing themselves out to media. So I think it fundamentally comes down to ensuring that they know that they're interesting enough and they're cool enough and they're phenomenal and they're just as deserving of the front page of the Times as like the next tech bro. I think the intersection between public relations and social advocacy is really important, to be honest. Like that's all born in storytelling, and storytelling and pure, like they're essentially the same thing. So I, of course, I work in the tech sector, but if I can continue my work here, what I want to do is be able to put out compelling narratives about why female founders are so important and also the economic opportunity that is behind them as well. Because I can't remember who said it, but someone had made the point to me before that like it's not just like bad ethically to not have like female founded companies get investment. It's also just bad business sense, to be honest. So I know you've spoken previously with Anne Romanova, and she's absolutely phenomenal. I've done some work with her, and like if I can tell anyone to do anything, I would say go check out Global Investor because it's just a fantastic platform that really speaks to these issues. But yeah, I mean, the more I can do to push out female voices, the better. And it, like, look, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You have to, if one female CEO sees another female CEO's interview and goes, I could do that too. It has a knock-on effect that I think is really important.
I couldn't agree more. And yes, go and check out Global Investor. I completely agree. And look, unfortunately, that brings us nicely to the end of our episode today here on the Global Discussion. Firstly, I want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to us around the world, wherever you may be. I'm going to ask you to follow and like and subscribe and share the show with your colleagues and friends around the world because it sure helps us. And also go and check out all the great work that Andie's doing at Beachhut PR and Global Investor as well, as we mentioned. And all that remains for me is to ask you to join me back here for some more conversations with creatives and leaders and thinkers just like Andie. But Andie, thanks for being on the show today. I really enjoyed our conversation. It's been great talking to you again today.
Thank you so much, Simon.